Oh boy. Alright, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, and saying that the bosses of the new game are all bad would be horribly misrepresenting reality. This game actually has one of my favorite fights in the entire series, Phantom Striker, but before we get into that, we have to analyze how the boss design changed from the first game to this one. Boss design didn't change too much between Shovel Knight and Plague of Shadows. That's kind of why the bosses were a lot easier. They weren't built for the new system. Look at me beating this Treasure Knight. He's a total pushover, because the water gives me a huge advantage with my little baby jumps. The problem is fixed with the simple fact that Specter of Torment is rebuilt from the ground up. You'll notice a lot of Shovel Knight fights are very straightforward. There's a dude, you fight the dude. The dude hits you with a shovel or a scythe or something like that. Sometimes he's got little guys who come and fight you for him. It works because you're using the same basic methods as the boss. Sure, the bosses may have some cool moves, but nothing too crazy. It's simple and fun. Nothing more. With Specter Knight, you can't do the same thing. He has too many mobility options for the fight to be fair and balanced like that. If King Man sitting on the ground, and then all Specter Knight has to do is air slice him a bunch, and that's no fun, it's too easy. So how did the game change to keep the difficulty up? Let's play a little game of compare and contrast. Here's the Black Knight fight from Shovel Knight. Notice how there's one primary field of damage, one source that could deal damage to you. Now look at the Black Knight fight with Specter Knight. Notice how there are two? The game changed so that most of the bosses have two sources of damage, sometimes even more, and there are sources that can both shoot projectiles sometimes, which makes fights a lot less about avoiding one enemy's attacks and a lot more about positioning yourself on screen so you avoid all of the attacks, all of the fields of damage. Don't focus on the boss, but what's around the boss. Enemies that don't have two sources of damage usually have little changes in the arena to make it harder to traverse, impairing your Superfly skater skills. Tinker Knight's fight does both, and adds a lot of tension to it by making the arena scrolling, which I wish they would do more of considering how cool the fight is. That leads me to my favorite fight in all three of the games, Phantom Striker. Oh, he's so cool. The fight starts out real simple. You have two basic fields of damage and projectiles. The arena is set up in a way that you have to face the enemies, and moving around is kind of the only way you can survive, so it makes you tackle the situation. He doesn't seem that hard until you realize once he starts charging up his attacks, he becomes invulnerable. And all of a sudden this little electric bit gets harder to avoid when there's two of them. And then this attack is really hard to avoid, but it's thrown in there to keep you on your toes, make you lose focus. The fight gets progressively harder to deal with as time goes on. This comes to a head with lightning coming down from the sky to strike you wherever you are. You can take cover underneath the platforms, but then you're vulnerable to the attacks from the main boss. It's a real struggle to try and find openings, attack at the right time, maneuver around the arena, and constantly keep moving to avoid getting hit. I could do the same thing with Rize's fight, which is so much fun, though I won't be counting it as a serious boss fight considering it doesn't take place in a stage. I'll keep it brief, but the way that Rize is set up is to actively discourage mindless wailing. His attacks are designed so that you have to wait for the specific points to lash out, otherwise he'll totally dominate you. You seriously need to consider what you're going to do, when you're going to attack, and what the consequences might be. And that's one of the things I love about some of these bosses. They make it hard to abuse the Uber combo. There's too many projectiles in Tinker Knight's stage. How are you going to make time to heal if you have to get around all the wrenches and stay on top of the drill and avoid rockets and little, those things. Steam poofs. Getting some healing in becomes part of the challenge. Of the main game bosses, these two are the best, and offer a great example of how you can make a game new and interesting even with the concept as old as games themselves. So okay, now I have to talk about not those two, maybe three, bosses. If Plague of Shadows had a problem with pushover bosses, some of the bosses in Specter Knight have already laid down before you got in the room. Now, not everyone is horrible. Treasure Knight was fine. Black Knight was fine. Both of those fights are a-okay. Kind of middle of the road, but still fun, and provide a challenge, I suppose. And I would have no problem with saying that Black Knight was a good fight. But let's talk about the other ones. While I just spent a lot of time praising the game for its design, some of the fights just didn't change enough to make them interesting. Plague Knight tries to, but you can just keep jumping and slashing and win in a shockingly small amount of time. King Knight tries to do the arena shape bit, where like the pillars change heights, but let's be honest, as soon as you learn the jump to avoid slash attack, this fight is a breeze. What happened between here and here? Where did the delicate dance go, the artful ratio of attacks? And this is without me comparing him to Shovel Knight. This is the game not holding up to the standards it set for itself. Maybe that's why this game frustrates me so much. It reminds me too much of how I don't live up to my own standards. This review just got sad, but all that to say, I don't think I could bring myself to call any of these actually bad fights. Maybe lackluster, but not bad. No, only one fight gets that honor. So, Propeller Knight is... of all the stages in the game, Propeller Knight is probably one of the best. It's well crafted, it has interesting mechanics, it's incredibly engaging, and looks beautiful. So you can probably imagine my surprise when I got to the end and found... oh, easy boysy. Most of the bosses in the expansion may take 2 or 3 tries. Obviously, these 2 took more, but by and large, that's how long it took me. My first time through Specter of Torment, I beat Propeller Knight in 1 try. Not in a matter of minutes, but in seconds. That's a problem. The arena the fight takes place in is actually really cool. It's a scrolling stage, but vertically this time. Platforms dropping off into space, but the enemy just stands there. No projectiles, no second field of damage, nothing. He just hanging. Wail on him all you want, he won't mind. Ugh, it's ironic considering there are only 2 bad fights in the entire series, and both of them are Propeller Knight. I still tried to rationalize it with myself when I first played. I told myself, oh, well, at least Serena was cool, or, but there was a bit of challenge in the platforming, but no, it was just bad. I mean, look at this, I wasn't even trying and I got an achievement for never getting hit. Also, by the way, you see how this is cropped weird? Don't worry about it, I'll explain it later, you'll see what I mean. Oh, shut up. You come up with a better title. No. Touché. So the Tower of Fate has always been the big finale. There's a boss rush, there's challenging platforming, it's great. And a lot of the strongest moments of the Shovel Knight games have come from the tower stages. And as far as the levels are concerned, everything's perfect. Everything works great. All the mechanics are there, all the experiences are there, everything's just fun. Especially this section. The bosses, well... Black Knight was fine, though totally unmemorable. Even writing this, I have trouble calling to mind what happened in that fight, though I remember it being fun. And then there's a boss... what? No boss rush? No second stage? Why? I mean, it's not a big deal, but you could have had Fight for Baz too if you're gonna do something like that. Come on, Yacht Club. Why you gotta play me like that? Similar to Black Knight, the Enchantress is fun, but not really memorable. But you see the problem with this, right? I could tell you loads about the Shovel Knight fight, even though I haven't played it in a long time, but it's good. It's a fun fight. These are the big finales, the Sigma battles of Shovel Knight, and they're delegated to roles of Mole Knight or Treasure Knight, the cool in-betweeny bosses that don't have a real huge impact. I guess this, above all else in this analysis, is very subjective. I'm arguing memorability, and that's not really something that is even semi-universal. And I could see how some people could be left with a pretty profound impact from these fights, due to the lighting and stylistic choices, etc. But of course, all Shovel Knight fans know that the Enchantress is not, in fact, the true final boss. There's always a final form, usually involving some kind of freaky body horror, and I'm happy to say that this final fight delivers. With plenty of body horror too, if that is your cup of tea, which luckily it is. Hope you liked that joke. I had to download Careless Whisper just for it. The fight tests your skills, your ultimate skills, at ultimate skating. The tracks are set up in a way that you really have to think about your surroundings, and the projectiles and main enemies make it the perfect ratio of damage fields I was talking about. The spacing of the platforms also acts as a nice way to get you to think about the use of your will skull. You can only use it when you're off the tracks, which means you have to wait until you're totally safe and won't be totally boned when you're done with the animation. It can also be used to get a little bit of extra air if you're smart about it. This fight blends what was so great about the Phantom Striker fight and the Tinker Knight fight. The scrolling arena gives the fight a platforming aspect to keep you engaged, and the enemy requires you to seriously think about maneuvering and timing. This fight nearly made up for the crappy stuff about the Tower of Torment levels. It's a kind of boss that when you get pushed down, you just smile and keep going, because the fight is so fun, you don't even care when you win. I think that's why I felt so happy about this game right after I finished playing it. It was such a good bang, such a triumphant note that I couldn't help but feel jazzed over it. But at the end of the day, I always come back to the question, was it actually that good? Was it actually that fun? Even with the cool level design, the fun gameplay, and the couple nice bosses, does it really overcome the forgiving health system, abusable combos, and downright crappy boss design at some points? And the answer is no, it doesn't. These problems are too large to bear, and as a Shovel Knight fan and as a critic, I can't ignore those faults. That's why I could call this a weak entry into the Shovel Knight franchise, not as a game on its own, but comparatively for sure. So while I left Specter of Torment with mostly good vibes and excitement, I am also aware that it's only because of the last stellar note. And no matter how good that last note may be, it doesn't fix the rest of the game's problems. So I understood, okay, this is a great game, but perhaps the ugly duckling of the Shovel Knights. It will be doomed to a lesser fate. But then, dear viewers, then I started New Game Plus. Really, the only thing I can do here is describe to you my first-hand experience of playing NG+. And if you haven't played it, please do, it's a really nice reveal. So I started playing and right away something was different. What? What's up with the bar? So at the time I had just finished playing it for the first time and I kind of just wanted to like breeze through, so I didn't really focus on it too much. So I was like, whatever. So I kept playing and I took some damage later on and I was all like, ooh, time to use the will skull because I am a casual. Well, hang on a minute, why can't I use it? What's up with the reg dex? Can I not use items? No, I just can't use the will skull. What's going on? Your health and magic are the same bar. Your health and magic are the same bar. So many weird design choices all of a sudden make sense. Remember that odd choice to give you mana when you attack enemies? Well, yeah, no duh they did that, because in NG+, your health is constantly ticking down. It puts even further pressure on you to go full out and, if you'll pardon the expression, balls to the walls. Bosses that were once just throwaway fights like Plague Knight and Treasure Knight are all of a sudden incredibly hard boss fights that require tons of thought. Now even using items requires as much thought as jumping or healing. The stakes are so much higher that for the first time in a long while, I feel it. The classic Shovel Knight difficulty, that absolutely crushing, devastating loss that feels absolutely thrilling. That high-stakes gameplay that feels fair and rewarding. I haven't felt that feeling in a platformer since I played Mega Man X for the first time a couple years ago. That's the magic, that feeling I've been missing. Some people say that I could get that feeling from talking to people and falling in love, but I really think that indie retro platformers are a much better option. Now let's be clear. Not all the problems were fixed. Remember that footage of Propeller Knight? Yeah, that was NG+. That's why I cropped it all weird. So while NG+ is great, I actually think it's one of the best game modes of any Shovel Knight game. It's not quite perfect, and it's still lacking in some areas, particularly the bosses. Now this video is way too long, so I wanted to sum everything up, probably starting with now in conclusion, or some other tried and true method of essay ending that I learned from my English class, Miss Corona. You know who you are. But the simple fact of the matter is, I'm just not done yet. I need to talk about what makes this game the best of the Shovel Knights, what extra little sizzle that boosts this game from good to great. I can't end without talking about the story. Continued in part 3.
Because that's the time I think about 9/11 every time I pee.